So this forms a program of Greening Greenfield and Franklin County continuing the political revolution. And we'd like to thank for their support the Markham Nathan Fund for Social Justice and the New England Grassroots Environment Foundation. So the Forum Committee has explored the subject of housing in Franklin County, and we find that one of the basic problems is the shortage of housing of all types: rental, co-ops, duplex, single family, transitional, accessible, and green. The shortage of housing is even worse if the need is for accessible housing as well as affordable housing. As the FERCOG study shows, there is a shortage of housing for low and middle income residents in Franklin County. It showed there is a deficit of about 1,200 homes, and in a few years that deficit could be 2,200 if we don't do anything. We know that people have a hard time finding a place to live in Franklin County and in Greenfield. I believe, though, our timing is good with this forum because now that Trump is gone, hooray, and there's a new administration in Washington that seems to be willing to invest in housing. So I think we may have some money flowing our way, and we should start thinking about the solutions and get ready for the solutions we think will work. Tonight, we're exploring the Community Land Trust experience. CLTs provide the basics for a democratically controlled, community-led creation of housing. I would call community land trusts a little bit of socialism within a capitalist economy. I'm very happy to introduce you to Brenda Torpy, just recently retired as the head of the Champlain Housing Trust. We couldn't ask for a more hands-on expert on the subject of CLT and community housing. She has prepared for us a valuable exploration of the experiences and structure of the community land trusts in Vermont. I also welcome to help me with the workshop Megan McDonough, who lives in Coleraine and can describe her experiences with the Community Land Trust in Coleraine and Habitat for Humanity. She'll also help me with the question and answer for things that I don't know anything about then. So Brenda Torpy will describe the example of the Champlain Housing Trust and other land trusts nationally and internationally. This will be a three-part presentation. We'll leave a break between the sections for clarification questions or other questions. Please put stack in the chat or write your question in the chat. And that's it. And we're going to keep there's a recording, and there'll also be a copy of the chat in case we don't get to all the questions. You know, we definitely will have a follow-up meeting where we will deal with lots of people's questions that didn't get answered. So let's get going. Welcome, Brenda.
So can everybody see that all right? All right. Well, I want to just say thank you to Judy, Gabby, Megan, and all of you tonight for your time and attention and concern on this important issue of affordable housing. It's tremendous that you've pulled together this series for your community. Tremendous information and opportunity for you to think ahead. And yes, Judy, you're right. There will be funding now for affordable housing and in support, particularly also of these models of community-led housing. As Judy said, I'm going to do this in three parts. First, I'd like to say up front that community housing trusts and community land trusts are one and the same thing. A number of us just changed our name to housing trust because people thought as land trusts we were. Conservation trusts, we wanted people to be able to find us who needed housing. But it is one and the same, and you will see the role of land in the model as we go forward. So in the first part, we'll look generally at community land trusts, you know, just the definition of the model. And then we'll look at Champlain Housing Trust and what we are doing in Northwest Vermont as a trust. And then at the end, we'll look at how this has been adapted in many countries, not just across the country, but in many countries. And it goes to really the flexibility of the model to local needs. So what is a trust and how do they address the issues you've been wrestling with? We'll look first here at definition, then we'll look at the structure, and then we'll look at how trusts operate. So, whoops. So here's a basic definition, and I like to say that just as conservation trusts take land out of the market to protect the environment for, open space, wildlife habitat, and agriculture, CLTs remove land from the market to protect our communities, to protect us from negative market impacts like rapid cost inflation, disinvestment, and to help preserve a community's investments in the quality of life for all their residents. And of course, a big one of those, the one you're wrestling with, is affordable housing and home ownership. So a community land trust is an organization created to hold land for the benefit of the community and individuals. And I'm giving you the definition of the Champlain Housing Trust because we are organized as a classic community land trust. So I'm going to use us as a model throughout and just point out where there's variations as well. But it'll also save us time in the second section when instead of describing our structure, I can go right to our programs. But you see in our definition, our mission statement, that we support the people of Northwest Vermont and strengthen their communities through the development and stewardship of permanently affordable homes and related assets. So it's that balance that land trusts achieve between helping people to access housing, but also providing a benefit to the community by ensuring continued access to affordable housing. And in this way, helping entire communities to remain inclusive and equitable in a sustainable way. So the model structure is designed, as we'll see, to balance these interests. What's the structure? One of the first characteristics of a trust that's different to many housing nonprofits is that it is a membership organization. And we say democratically structured with an open membership because the membership does elect the board of directors. So how do you define that? How do you define what your community is? Well, your community is your service area, the area you choose to serve. This is a very place-based model. So you could be identified as a neighborhood, a city, a county, or a region. Now, in fact, there are also statewide community land trusts, like in Delaware, and Elevation out of Denver is working statewide. Our service area is, we started out just as Burlington, and we were called Burlington Community Land Trust, but we grew to serve our surrounding county and now 3 counties to the north of Burlington. So from Burlington up to the border. And within that, we have urban, suburban, and rural markets. I'll make a note here that the complexity of housing production and preservation has really taken the movement to look at larger service areas because scale, really helps with capacity. And a hybrid approach is now emerging that where CLTs are bonding together for technical and back office capacity. So this is a great solution where you can maintain that local control and the stability locally, but bring some capacity together. In Vermont, Champlain Housing Trust provides back office support to the state's many rural and smaller CLTs. So then you define your membership as the people in that region and service area. And we, by having a membership and having them involved, you're really, again, balancing that community need with the people already served and making sure you're in touch with what the community wants. So in our case, as a matter of keeping this open, if you support our mission, you can join for $1, right? We don't want anything to be a barrier to participation, except if you did not support our mission. And in the trust, members have real rights. Members not only serve it on and elect the board, but we have to go to the members to approve bylaw changes, to approve changes to the affordability formula that all land trusts have, approve of any disposition of assets, and particularly the sale of land, because the goal is to hold land, but of course, sometimes you have to sell a piece, and that has to be a consensus you'd go to the membership for, and also to approve any dissolution or disposition. Now, these are big decisions that are normally left with a board of directors and a nonprofit. So that is the democratic aspect of a trust. And then we're balancing not just by having membership, but also on a board of directors. We balance the representation. This is how we do it. The board typically includes, occupants of the trust-owned lands, other community residents in the region, and then public interest representatives. And board members also have term limits. So again, always trying to promote that openness and outreach to the community, the need to turn over. So here shows you how we use the three parts of the board. We have a 50-member board now, and 1/3 is resident of our homes. And Champlain Housing Trust has three kinds of residents. We have renters, we have co-op owners, and we have home ownership owners. But as a matter of membership in the trust and representation on the board, they're all the same. There is no hierarchy of ownership. And then our non-resident members, that's again, anybody in the community, and that's a place where we can have different kinds of skill sets or leadership that we feel really adds value to the trust. And we reserve our public seats for actual local government representation, our city managers or town managers or their designees. Now, that's in other trusts, public seats might be representatives of other organizations, other public agencies, the faith community. There's a lot of ways you can mix this up, but the ideal here is to have a plurality of your homeowners and residents, but not have to be everybody because your region has other folks unserved, and to balance, again, balance. So, and I have one more thing on governance. The other place that you can balance these interests is in our governance, not just in the representation, but what are the bylaws and the structure that we operate by. And I'll just give two examples. For example, in our trust, the quorum is not just a majority of the board, it has to have a representative from each category of board member to have a quorum to make decisions. And those issues that need to go to the membership require a super vote of the board. So really be careful that those things will virtually achieve consensus and win the support of the membership. Okay, so now we're on to operations. So what are the tools used to operate this mission? Well, the CLT is a hybrid of co-ops and private ownership, collectively owned land, and individual ownership of the homes or any building or use on the land. The lease instrument is what ties these parties together and specifies the terms of use that assure both rights of the people on the land and community control for the long term. For this reason, the ground lease really needs to be balanced. It is a long-term lease. In Vermont, it's 99 years, but the lease is inheritable so that you own the land on the trust. No one's going to come and say, well, the lease is up, time to go. Your children inherit that home like in home ownership. And the leases and the improvement can be financed. So they're recognized in the real estate market. So why this hybrid of land ownership and individual ownership? How did this come about? And I am a person who looks to history to understand why things are the way they are. So let's go to the founding Community Land Trust. The first Community Land Trust rose from the civil rights movement as a solution to the economic and social disenfranchisement of Black Americans in Albany, Georgia. People who were asserting their voter rights were kicked off their leasehold farms. So drawing on land reform traditions from England, India, Israel, and others, the founders of new communities chose a model that enabled individual homeownership on collectively owned land. Because as important as ownership was to those folks to hold their homes after those experiences, they recognized their need to join together, to be able to get a hold of land collectively, and because they're farmers and they needed substantial land to farm. And what they did was they They farmed, whoops, I'm sorry. They farmed the land together as a co-op, and they had a business, but they own their homes individually. And at the end, I have a resource to show you where there's a tremendous film about their story called The Arc of Justice, and it's a very inspiring story, and I highly recommend it. So in the 70s, the model was adapted to the urban context, where civil rights advocates were fighting to protect Black neighborhoods from disinvestment, speculation, and gentrification. So you can see here that part of adapting this was to structure the CLT to include non-resident members of those neighborhoods they were working to serve, and not just have, like in a co-op, the people already living in the CLT homes to be on the board. And also this enabled the CLT to move to a scattered site model where they could save properties anywhere in their neighborhood or city and bring them into this trust and be stewards of those properties for value. So unlike any previous affordable housing or community development model, the CLT enabled the protection of lower income home ownership as well as rental in the battle against displacement. So that was an innovation. Cincinnati was one of the earliest urban CLTs, along with others in DC and Atlanta. And they're the ones we looked to in the early 80s when we started CHT. And they were all struggling because, of course, they were fighting City Hall. They did not have support. And when we pick up the history with CHT in the 80s, that ushered in an era of municipally supported CLTs, which enabled CLTs to start really having an impact and partnership in their communities. So before diving into CHT and the home ownership model itself, which takes everybody's always interested in really how that works, I want to show you the variety of applications of the model around the country and how CLTs are serving the communities in a broad array of ways by doing the different community development needs of their communities. So let's start here with these beautiful net zero homes that were built by their residents on Lopez Island in the San Juan Islands. Very unique, very committed there to green development, and a tremendous project. On another island in the San Juan Islands, Orcas, it's a bigger island. The Opal CLT really develops a range of homes, like conventional rental and everything, because they have a bigger market and they're trying to serve their workforce. So there's a variety right there. These are limited equity co-ops in San Francisco, and they're using the land trust as a way to preserve these buildings that are affordable rentals and helping people co-op them. A land trust is a very good partner to a co-op because it's that added layer of stewardship of the affordability. As you all probably know, many co-ops that were developed as affordable, and many people share their equity over the years, and then the members at some point were able to vote out the limited equity formula, and those places went to market. And so this is a good partnership if you really want to preserve that affordability you've achieved. And then a lot of rural CLTs have these manufactured housing communities. We do, and there's a lot in Vermont. And again, those communities could be structured as cooperatives, as some are, or just as homeowner associations, or be directly owned by the trust and managed by them. So in any of these formulas, CLTs are helping to preserve this very affordable housing where the residents are often at risk of displacement. When you're doing neighborhood redevelopment, part of saving the legacies of your neighborhood is the local businesses, maybe social services and maybe businesses, food deserts. There's a lot of applications. And so land trusts are doing this all around the country. So returning to our roots, there are more CLTs now doing ag. Of course, in Vermont, we don't because we have a lot of conservation trusts, but very important, and I would say is a growing need in the depopulated cities where neighborhoods are coming together and creating a trust and setting aside land for urban agriculture. It's a very exciting development, and again, helping in food deserts. Community gardens are another important urban use. We do them for our city, and so do many others. It's ideal. And then, of course, just neighborhood parks and other amenities that make your neighborhood enjoyable and livable. These can all be produced by your trust. So before we leave this broad section, let's take a look at that home ownership model. In the home ownership for single family home ownership, and this is the biggest application of CLTs around the country and actually exported, because it is the game changer that CLTs added to the affordable housing sector, the ability to make homeownership affordable and also keep it affordable. Now, leasing is commonplace in the broader market for commercial uses, but it was not at all common in residential use. Conventionally, in residential, house and land are joined for the purposes of appraisal and value, for financing, for taxation. So this was the biggest hurdle for early CLTs. We had to struggle to change that industry and make it work for us, which has been accomplished in this generation of CLTs. So in the ground lease, in the trust, a formula is embedded in the ground lease. That's what tells folks what their resale restriction is, and it protects it because that's a legal instrument, an agreement between the homeowner and the trust. And the formulas for affordability are varied. We'll see ours, but in about half the CLTs have a formula that's based on appraisal, and I'll show you how that works. And others base their formula on just an index of you earn 2% a year, or they base it on cost of living, or another index, or a combination. But your formula is entirely up to you, and you can base it on your market and your values of what's going to work for you over time. So to conclude this section, I just want to revisit this balance we have. So how are we balancing the benefits to homeowner and to the community? So we'll start with the homeowners. Of course, trusts have to first create that affordable home, access and security. That's a benefit to everybody who needs a home. Many homeowners are now using this as a stepping stone to market because they can get into a trust affordable home faster than saving for the big down payment. They get the typical tax benefits of any homeowner, but also support and stewardship from the land trust. We are the homeowners and developers who don't go away and leave people on their own. Now, the benefits to the community are just you have that control over the goals that you have for your community. And you're preserving the affordability you've created for folks. You're retaining and recycling your public subsidies. Now, this just makes it more sustainable and you can help more people, but it's also a win when you're trying to convince people to do it because everybody's concerned about, right, how are we spending our public money? I mean, unless it's tax cuts for business, but it's a little editorial comment. But you're retaining your access to home ownership, you're preserving your housing stock, and you're mitigating against the negative impacts of gentrification. So that concludes the zip tour through what is a trust.
Okay, thank you for
Thank
that
you.
tour of what is a trust. Now, does anyone have a question they'd like to ask about this section on like what is a land trust and what the history of the community land trust is? As we can take a little break here before she goes on to the next section. So there's a question from Kamar to everyone. Is are board members paid?
No, thank you. That's a good question. Board members, it's a not-for-profit corporation, right, with the charitable designation. So of course, we don't pay board members. That is entirely voluntary. But you raise a good point. If I could use this moment to say, when you want to have that mix of board members and you want everybody to really be at the table equally, you have to invest in your board. You have to really care about that representation, which we do and trusts do. And part of valuing the board is giving them access to training and resources. We reimburse all costs that any board member would incur, like babysitting or travel, and we pay for trainings, even if they have to travel for the training, and provide resources, but it is an unpaid voluntary representation.
Okay, good. Now, here's a question, it might be covered later on, but the question is there a guide about how a community would get started setting up such an arrangement? From George.
Yes, and you'll see when we do resources, our national network, Grounded Solutions Network, has many resources that are free now on the website. We were a peer-to-peer network to start, and we've shared all our stuff, and there's some tremendous resource to help a group map out the next steps. I would say you all are doing the greatest first step for any affordable housing initiative, which is, bringing the community together to inform themselves and discuss the issue. It's a great start.
Okay, I just want to say I took one of the courses at Grounded Solution on what is affordability in housing and how they do the equity and the value and start it up. So that's a good resource. And there are other nonprofit organizations also that help with learning and setting up CLTs. Okay, so then, whoops. Let's see, Chad says CLT equals 501c3 if renting is a 503 used.
Yes, even in our rentals, Champlain Housing Trust, many trusts own a lot of rentals, and you still bring them into your C3. I understand it's government programs structure those projects differently, but you could bring them in stewardship under your C3, and then ultimately you'll be the one who owns them forever. So that's a good question.
Yeah.
Technical question.
Kamar puts a link people might want to see for resources. And then Doug Selwyn asks, in what ways can local governments inhibit or support CLTs?
Thank you. In the next section, I will show you models of government support.
Okay.
But to inhibit, governments could just refuse to allocate their affordable housing funding to this purpose. There are states that have actually passed laws to prevent municipalities from creating permanent affordability. So yes, the wide range of how the government could get in the way or help. And we'll be discussing that a bit because that's our model.
Well, I'll finish with this one comment, and then we can take a breath and go on to the next section. So Pam Kelly says to everyone, one of the best things about CLTs, I think, are the stability encouraged by land trusts. So people who live in a place a long time get invested in their community, cleanup, livability, and knowing your neighbors, that there's a closeness. I agree too. There's a closeness with knowing your neighbors then. Okay, thank you, Pam. So if you're ready, Brenda, we'll head on to the next part.
I'm ready. And in fact, the second section is a little more robust because of, but there's plenty of time. So let's dive into that. So this section is about us and how we're creating and preserving access to affordable housing. So how did Burlington Community Land Trust is how we started. How did we get started? Well, the creation of BCLT came out of the Bernie Sanders administration. It was a very progressive and innovative response to the housing issues of the 1980s. And his government's commitment to first and foremost assuring security and affordability to the city's lower income residents. The other characteristic of his sort of approach to government and this housing agenda was empowerment and the inclusion of citizens in their own solutions. And it was housing issues that really caused people to vote for this outsider because the existing government was not addressing issues of need of housing in the neighborhoods. And they range from the loss of publicly subsidized housing, expiring use, they call it, the federal budget cuts that were coming into play from Reaganomics. And so you knew you couldn't replace that affordable housing anymore at the local level. There was gentrification occurring in this very low-income neighborhood near the downtown of the Old North End, where College Town and our waterfront was developing. So there was a lot of threatened displacement, a lot of speculation in that neighborhood. Now in the 80s, there were also double-digit mortgage interest rates, hard to imagine now, and this excluded most from home ownership. Vermont, of course, had no codified landlord-tenant law. Rental housing and regulation was very weak, and their rents were high. So the list of issues around housing went on, and they were pretty dire. So given the loss of affordability all around and the failure of both market and government programs, the Sanders administration committed to housing that would be permanently affordable and community-led. The CLT models, you can see that we found in research, I was working for Bernie, fit right into that vision. And this was accomplished in a policy that we put under the 4 Ps, right? First, to protect vulnerable residents and low-income residents, to produce permanently affordable housing, not give money to the market to make housing, but to produce permanently affordable housing, to promote ownership with new forms of ownership like the CLT and co-ops that didn't exist then there, and to preserve all housing and community-led nonprofits. So while none of this was done as government programs, the city really leaned into the issue of permanent affordability, and all public funds were directed to nonprofits and resident-owned housing. So with the support of city government, we were able to get a startup. And people often ask us, well, how do we get funding for startup? And the city did provide funding to us, and we spun off as a 501c3. And we started with a grant from the city just for capacity of $200,000. The city also invested some in the pension fund so that we had capital, to acquire buildings in this hot speculative market so we could act fast. And then we had to pay those back and replace them with other dollars. And then the city targeted what federal funds it got for housing, again, to the nonprofit housing CDBG program and later home funds. But the city also created a couple of resources of their own, and this has become a trend at the local government level. A housing trust fund, Burlingtonians tax themselves a penny on the property tax for the trust fund, and a zoning rule called inclusionary zoning, where every new development is required to provide in the downtown 15% permanently affordable housing. So the developers would give those to us, to nonprofits, so like you do that. And on the waterfront, it's 20%. So not only is the waterfront obviously the valuable land, but at the time there was a fair amount of it under redevelopment because it had been an industrial waterfront and it was transitioning out of that. So that was an opportunity to build affordable housing. So this model of a city-supported CLT started to happen in the 80s, and we were not the only one. And the one pictured here on the cover of this book about the City CLT partnership is the Sawmill Trust in Albuquerque, New Mexico, where the city cleaned up a brownfield site. It had been a sawmill near the railroad tracks, and then gave that site to the trust to create a big mixed income, mixed tenure neighborhood. It's beautiful. It's fantastic. I've been out there and they just did a tremendous job. Another tremendous story of partnership is the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative in Boston. The city of Boston gave Dudley Street the power of eminent domain. So they were able to purchase and acquire abandoned lands that people were using as garbage dumps in the middle of their neighborhood. So Dudley Street did a big community process of planning to redevelop those sites collectively. And they created also permanently affordable home ownership and continue to be a real strong organizing community. And they develop leadership, particularly with youth. And they have great videos about their story that you can access through YouTube. So I really highly encourage that. Oh, I skipped one here. And then just coming back to Vermont, we were lucky that in addition to Burlington, the state added support and soon followed Burlington's lead because statewide, Vermont was experiencing its first pressures of gentrification and development pressure on our agricultural lands, and also was losing subsidized affordable housing around the state, and in rural markets, sometimes that was the only really good rental housing. And so the Vermont government adopted a policy of permanent affordability and created a state trust fund called the Housing Conservation Board to fund both permanently affordable housing, and conservation of lands. And then they developed a preferential mortgage through their finance agency for shared equity home ownership. And the trust fund provides capacity grant and capacity to start community land trusts. So the community development organizations created in the 80s and 90s around Vermont are CLTs. And so that was a tremendous boost. And they continue. Now, we've had to fight to protect these through, we've had some conservative administrations, but because now, there are large communities invested in the trust, that's the beauty of the model. And the advocacy has held on to these tremendous resources for community. So Champlain Housing Trust experienced our big growth and our name change when we merged in a local nonprofit that had specialized in affordable rental housing as developers and managers. They were committed to permanent affordability, but they were not a community land trust and had developed really well in a lot of our entering suburbs. And at the time of merger, the two boards really decided that it was the community land trust that should be the structure that continues on. And I think this shows the strength of this model and resiliency, because their board saw that we had the community participation. We had, the investment of the community. We had turned our membership into the base of fundraising and donor base. And so there was a real strength to that. And that's when also we added seats to the board and included the municipal governance positions that they had on their board. So that was, and we did a big outreach in person to all their renters. I think it was 750 at the time, to let them know they were now members of their organization and could serve on the board and so on. So that was fun. So Champlain Housing Trust today, in a nutshell, we have about 300 million in assets under our stewardship. And annually, we need a $15 million budget to operate, but that is just a small chunk of the 130 million in annual development that we generate through the production, preservation of homes, through all the mortgages we leverage, and so on. We have over 3,000 homes, and 640 of these are in the shared equity portfolio. And of course, we've served almost 1,200 families with those because they resell. And we have 120 employees, and that's the size of our staff is really due to two things. One is we manage and maintain all of our property, all of our rentals ourselves. And also we have a growing social service arm as we house more and more folks experiencing homeless, and I'll talk about that later. But you could really sum up all our activities simply that we do home ownership and multifamily rental housing. We produce it and preserve its affordability. And to do that, though, we require a team of real estate developers, our community relations department, which does, our membership outreach, as well as public advocacy, fundraising, communications, and so on. We have resident services that range from like social services up to community building activities on sites. And then in addition to our shared equity homeownership program, we have a mobile home loan program. We do rehab loans, very affordable for any low-income homeowner. And we do home ownership counseling and financial education to anyone in the community that's not means tested. And now we do a lot of that kind of work with our renters as well. So this is how we envision. Our vision is a continuum of housing. While we certainly don't have enough of it, we do strive to have options at every level to meet people in their need. And also it does operate as a continuum for folks to be able to move up, or if you get into trouble, like a homeowner is struggling, we can help them get into affordable rental and not go, lose all their credit and stuff. But we start, if you look at the two bands, the housing stock goes from emergency motels and shelters to single room occupancy homes with services, rental, affordable apartments, cooperative shared equity homes, and a variety of stock. And then we have all these programs underlying that and supporting that. And this is really the glue. SASH is a health services at home program for our seniors, and we help special populations. We have a range of, as I said, resident services. And then these are the programs to help our renters Succeed, Ready, Set, Rent, On Track. If you get in trouble, we never want to do economic evictions, if we can do anything to save that family's security. Credit counseling, home buyer education, and then if need be for closure delinquency counseling. So now let's just take a little tour, break this up, and see. I represented a sample of our properties of the kind of work that we do. So this picture is something we've done a lot of. In the downtown and adjacent neighborhoods, we're preserving the stock as we mostly do rental housing in that stock. And also preserving the historic character. And with old buildings, we're always upgrading it and enhancing it with the energy efficiency, which today there are great technologies we have tons of solar, hot water, and solar arrays on our buildings. Whereas when you build new, you can just build green. Here's again, a very urban aspect where we mix our commercial with housing, even in new construction. Down on the right is our headquarters. And I wished I'd had time to put in a more recent picture, because this time of year we have tulips across the front and blooming trees. It's our best time of the year, but not there. And then the one on the top right is in our Old North End Target area on a brownfield site. And we have a credit union there and apartments. So a lot of the neighborhood development is not just housing, as we spoke of, and these are examples of our work. On the right is a historic building converted to offices for legal aid. We did capital campaign for these. And the left is a new construction of food shelf and meal site on a former brownfield. Our latest community services building is a huge former Catholic school. It's a beautiful big gym and stage. And so we are serving a range of nonprofits there, notably the AALV, which serves refugees and new Americans, who are a large part of the neighborhood now. And but the city parks program took it on as a site for their programming. So now you have year-round sports activities right in the heart of the Target area because of that big gym and community theater, and there's youth program, child development, just a range of things and great synergy among the programs in that building. Here's an example of revitalization, one house at a time. This is a foreclosed property, but one foreclosed property, so after the crash on a block, really affects everyone. So we're able to redevelop it, make it energy efficient, and it was our 500th shared equity home. So it had a big impact, and the North End is where we really can show the impact of a community land trust, because the neighborhood is less than an acre. It's about 0.8 of an acre. And in it, we have 400 homes that are permanently affordable of all kinds, from single room to single family homes. And all around this is gentrification, but of course we know at the core preserving that affordability in the neighborhood and the services that serve lower income folks and make it a good place to live. Here's more revitalization in our neighborhood with new construction. And this is our latest co-op and our biggest 40 apartment co-op. And that was half a block. And it took so long to acquire that. And it was a real blight. And finally, we've been able to bring ownership there with the co-op. And then we have smaller co-ops scattered in the city and the suburbs around inner ring suburb. It's still a small part of our portfolio. So now let's look at even in our rural market, the biggest city is St. Albans. And this is an old mill that we redeveloped for 40 apartments, very green features, not the color, but energy efficiency and the color. And it's on the edge of downtown. So that had a big impact. And then this is a small village, actually, but this building was the heart of their downtown in the village. And there was a big fire in it. And after we restored it, brought the commercial space back and apartments. And this shows in Vermont, and I know you have Green and Greenfield here, more about this than me, but we are very committed to restoring the village centers. And respecting the traditional development pattern of Vermont, which was these compact villages, and then our open space and agriculture. And we know that the best way to protect our natural land is to use the density we have, and it helps people to be close to services and create walkable neighborhoods and bring vitality back to places that had once been, of course, key centers. And this is new construction in downtown St. Albans, right across from City Hall, so big impact. It was a very kind of a slum building there, and this is mixed use with lots of affordable apartments. This shows you some of our suburban new construction development. It was a big development. We have 76 apartments here, and there's senior housing by another group. And so we broke up those buildings to match more of a, it's an exurb suburb, so a little more rural looking. It's a lovely neighborhood, really. And the yellow house you see at the back is a duplex built by Habitat. So whatever we can, we provide land to Habitat to build homes, and then we provide the support and stewardship to their residents. So that's typical sort of an urban development. And then we're very proud of this. On Burlington's waterfront, this was the first LEED certified residential building in the state. We get lots of awards. But for me, what's great about it is that it's rental house. It's the only rental housing on the waterfront, and it's affordable rental housing. And it was just a great opportunity for people. It's a mixed income building. And now, this is our latest, biggest, greenest development, probably. Ultimately, this will be over 800 homes. There's some restoration on it, and it's a mixed income, mixed use neighborhood. And with this development, we not only are creating a density of housing, it's like 5 minutes from downtown on the bus line, but we've restored, it's the last piece of waterfront that wasn't public access in Burlington. So there's the bike path. We added a public beach, and to your left of the buildings is playgrounds and sports fields, community gardens, and an access to the beach, because on this side of the road, you're close to our target neighborhood of the Old North End. So a lot of good things happening here for the community. The middle building on our left, looking at this, is our rental building. And then at the furthest end by the water, we're going to have over 60 permanently affordable condos next to what will be $1 million condos. And that's the beauty of this model and its opportunity. Now, I'll do a brief detour into our healthcare and homelessness. After the crash, we really leaned into serving the homeless at the request of our partners and the government. And this was our first thing. We got a motel where the state vouchered folks when it was cold weather, and it became a shelter year round. And it's in a very wealthy suburb, so it's been sometimes difficult with the neighbors, but it works very well. The interesting thing here is that the hospital was housing outpatients that they had who were homeless, who needed outpatient health care. And they noticed that the folks who were sheltered here did so much better than all their other homeless patients. And so they had a third-party evaluation and showed that in the course of a year, we saved the state and we saved the hospital $1 million each. But we had much better outcomes because of our services on site and our sort of funnel into housing that we provide. And so they gave us millions of dollars to create 2 permanent housing sites for folks who were chronically homeless and chronically ill with services, and they provided the capital and service money. So a very good partnership came out of that, an important one. And this we acquired during COVID, another hotel out of business. So it is now about 40 affordable small apartments. We can make small affordable apartments so much more cost effectively than new construction this way. And they're just lovely. And we have services on site there. And this was, many of the people we were sheltering at Harbor Place were escaping domestic violence. So we've been long looking for a building. This is another hotel for steps to end domestic violence. And now we did this one, and they have their program space and offices on the ground floor and apartments for 24 families upstairs. It's been a tremendous one. So a little smattering around our counties. And then now we'll look at this homeownership model. And we put our homeownership shared equity program in a bigger homeownership center context. And I think I told you about these programs. So it's very important because anyone from the community can come and learn about buying a home and can they afford it, what they can afford. And if they can get mortgage ready, but they can't afford our market, which you'll see would be hard to do, then they look at the shared equity program and people see it as a good option for them. So for shared equity, people always ask me, how do we fund that affordability, especially initially? So we'll look at some of these sources. As I mentioned, we get discounted property through inclusionary zoning. And then we get capital grants from our city and state trust funds. The state has a tax credit for home ownership, which we can layer on to help our folks buy through shared equity. And sometimes we get discounted sales, donations of property, and of course, partnerships like Habitat create affordability. And we bring properties into the portfolio through straight out acquisition. And when people resell, that opens up the home for another family needing affordability. And we had programmed that people could go out and find a home, and if it met our standards, we put it in the trust. And then we can do conversions from rental, and I'll come back to that later. It's a pretty cool thing how we can do that. So here's a few facts about our shared equity program today. Our average home price to people is $153,000, but the average home price in Chittenden County now is $347,000. It's ridiculous. And it jumped again with COVID, people just coming and buying houses with cash. It's terrible. Our homeowners sell an average of 10 years. That's pretty much like the market. And our average income of our buyers is 71%. We serve up to 100%, but we like to look at what's the best affordability we can achieve. And our average subsidy now, we have properties that have been there a long time, and you'll see how that works, have $80,000 in them to make them affordable. So how is our program designed? I mentioned we have an appraisal-based model. We use a ground lease, but now you can also use covenants. We have an affordability covenant that runs with the deed. We'll use any instrument to really secure that affordability. Sale after resale. We require our buyers to get that pre-purchase education. We only serve up to 100% median. That could vary. Some trusts only go lower and some go higher. We like to coordinate each sale, and we enter the chain of title. The person has to sell it back to us, and then we sell it on. We do that at a unified closing though. And our model is 25% of market appreciation. So how does that work? Well, this is what owners earn with this method. Of course, they get 100% of their mortgage paid down. And in the big, everyone's going to get rich in real estate before the crash. People forgot that the real way that people build wealth is paying down their mortgage, paying themselves, right? When you pay your mortgage, not that somehow your house is going to double in price and you'll have a windfall. It's really not it. And then they get 100% of the appraised value of any capital improvements. We don't want to discourage capital improvements, but they're really valued as they would appraise, not necessarily what you spent on them. And then they only get 25% of that market appreciation. This formula has worked for us over 35 years through all the ups and downs of the market. Mostly our market goes up though, sadly. So how does it work? We appraise the property of purchase and then at each resale. That's how you know the difference. It increased by $100,000. So you get 25,000 of that. So we put a subsidy to property and leave it in the property, and it recycles after each sale. I said we have the first option to repurchase. We enter the chain of title. And at resale, we offer the property to an income eligible buyer. So if you're in a land trust house and you want to sell, you call us up and say, we want to sell. We get an appraisal and we help you sell it. We market it. We have all these folks just pent up demand for affordable home ownership. And we do house showings and people sell quite easily. Now the trust instruments are designed that even if we weren't there, that resale restriction would survive in the law. But of course, you know that if you're not helping people do it, you're putting your program at risk. It's a difficult thing to say, you sell according to all these rules. So we see it as a very important point of service for people. So after all that programmatic stuff, let's take a little tour of our affordable homes. And there's quite a variety of these. So there's an older home bought in a suburb. This is a Habitat home in Essex. This is historic homes in our, there's an old fort in near Burlington that had lots of beautiful structures on it. And we've restored a lot of them. That's new construction condos in Burlington, not the prettiest. And these homes, I like these, were modular homes that we did a neighborhood in a very expensive suburb. And this is a home someone brought into the trust. Unique. More historic preservation. These are big condominiums. This neighborhood does really well. People love it. So to look at this section, how do we evaluate our program and how we're doing? And we do it by measuring, are we living up to that benefits to buyers and benefits to homeowners? So I'm going to start by, we did a study when we'd had 1,000 sales, sales and resales. And we looked at that time at the benefits to buyers. How were they doing? Well, they were getting their education and counseling, increasing purchasing power, and then lower upfront and monthly costs of $300 to $400 a month. So even if you're not building wealth, you have the money you're saving, right, with affordable home ownership, and it makes it more secure. We provide that ongoing support and stewardship, and you'll see we're providing a stepping stone to the market. And in our market, this is crazy. With many of our homes, people are saving up to $300 a month as compared to if they were renting. The rented market's crazy, which is why we do so much rental as well. So over that period of study, we saw that 77% of our buyers were earning less than 80% median, which is good in a hot market. And 29% were earning less than 60%. So we're also, with layering of programs, able to help very low income people become homeowners. And at that time, the average income was 69%. So this shows you, are people building wealth? And that was really the issue that always came up in the beginning when there was no history of how people would do in this program, right? Well, we saw that at that time, people were getting about $7,000 back when they sold. And we compared that to anything else a worker could invest in, right? If you could invest in the S&P in that time frame, there's a difference in what you would earn. So gold box being home ownership. There's just nothing else for a worker to build this kind of wealth. And it's why it's so important for us to be able to do this. We also saw that after selling, 2/3 of our homeowners purchased in the open market, which again showed that people were building the wealth, put that down payment down. And of course, when they move up, it's lovely. They open up that affordable home for another family that needs it. Now let's take a look at our benefits to the community. How are we doing with preserving affordability overall? Well, the turquoise line is the price of our homes, and the dark blue line is what's happening in the market. We've seen that comparison. And then because retaining community wealth, again, is a very important public argument, and also shows you the sustainability over time, how many more people you will serve. If we'd used the same amount of money in a conventional program, we could have served about 150 homeowners instead of the 357 we did, because of course we wouldn't be able to recycle any of it. Or another way to look at it is it would have cost the public 5 times more to do as many people as we did do if we weren't recycling the benefit. And then I like to end with this, because for me, this is a great example of benefit to individuals and community. This is the only model where you could do a condo conversion and it would be good for lower income people. This home is in a neighborhood that's a mixed tenure neighborhood that we purchased to keep it affordable. It was affordable. And there was this row of duplexes included, as well as other kinds of buildings. And we decided to look and see if we could make those, they were rental, affordable condos for the same cost. And yes, we could. So we put money in to improve them. So they market like a condo, they upgrade them, they're 25 years old. And then we offered them first to the renters and helped them through the home buyer education program and to get the grants. And this couple, the Wagners, had lived in that home since it was built 25 years before. And now for the same amount of money, they own it. and they are building wealth and equity with their monthly payment. And that's why they look so happy. But I think that's a win-win for the community and for individuals. Okay, so any questions about Champlain housing and various approaches?
Well, I think, you covered a whole lot, and some of the questions are, I think you already answered. Like somebody asked what percentage of of the CLT is business and how much is rental and how much is the affordable housing part. And I think you did go over that. Back a bit, Becca King was asking, we do have a lot of empty or part empty buildings in Greenfield and also in Montague and in Franklin County as a whole. Is there a way that CLTs can interface with rehab opportunities to the advantage of getting more housing? And I think you did go over that also, as that was a big part of how to acquire buildings and upgrade them and make them affordable. And
if I can make a comment on that one, if there's time, Judy, it is costly. The reason they stay empty often is it's costly, especially if they were old mills and stuff, which I think you do have in Greenfield, where this environmental cleanup is very important. And so this has been a rural problem. People can't redo their stock and have it be affordable to the people who live there. But this is where the new money, the new programs are coming. And it's particularly designated to help this problem, where you could invest back in what you have in your community. And even if it costs more than what people can buy, it's subsidized by the government. That's an appropriate government reinvestment in community. So we're looking forward to seeing that.
Okay. And Andrew Baker asks, do you find you need to re-subsidize homes after some time if owners are not sufficiently investing in their maintenance?
That's a tremendous question. Thank you. And yes, we have, in our home buyer education and in the rules of the lease, we let people know they, it's home ownership and they have to maintain it. And fortunately, our properties do turn over. So you have that opportunity at turnover. We will make the owner responsible for bringing it up, especially if there's code violations by then. But when the appraiser comes and prices it and we do an inspection, we'll make them responsible. One of the things we do, though, because people often is because people struggle and they don't have the money. And, one of the things about home ownership in the market is you're free to not maintain it, right? But we want people to maintain. So we'll say we'll put some money in if the buyer and seller, so we share it 3 ways. And so we use those turnovers as an opportunity to upgrade. We also have created what we call a stewardship fund. And you saw that we have some properties that have been in the trust for a long time and they cost us $80,000 and now they're worth, $250,000. So at resale, we have a formula and we can take money out of properties that have a lot of subsidy and put it into the stewardship fund to help with these overall. So you raised a good question, because one of the key matters of importance in a trust is you have an interest in that property forever. So you are going to have to go back in and upgrade just like you do with your rental.
Okay. Let's see. Somebody asked, why do any of the owners choose to move out?
A lot of people stay, but it's interesting. People move because their family grows, or a lot of times it's when they remarry, and then people move for job. We did a survey once, and it was pretty much the same reasons as anywhere. They're moving for school, they're moving for a job. But we've had folks grow out of their CLT home and buy another one in the CLT. A lot of people really, yes, they value that community and support.
Here's a good question. Sarah Brown Anson asks, I noticed there are housing co-ops within CHT. Could you say more about this and clarify the difference of the co-ops to the other housing?
Yeah, our co-ops are all zero equity co-ops. So people don't do it to build equity. They do it to have more control. And our co-ops are governed by boards of directors of their own co-op. And we provide by contract 2 kinds of services. We provide property management maintenance, because they're operating big properties, multifamily properties, and we provide governance service to the board so that we're helping that community to turn over, to train their board members to accomplish their tasks. And I love the cause because in them, people learn civic skills, right? Democracy skills, they learn business skills. At one time, Burlington City Council had 4 land trust residents on the city council, and 2 of them lived in co-ops.
Great, great. And then I skipped, but there's a stack. Nevin Murray, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah,
And,
thanks.
unmute yourself.
Thanks. It's the same question that Jono has actually. Yeah, he said it. Yeah, how did you arrive at that 25% appreciation resale value formula? And did you, versus like, I guess, not necessarily going with the market at all, but just going on inflation? And did you find that that has changed, like over the years has changed the like who you're seeing as residents? Do you see like more wealth moving in because there's like the appreciation is larger than just inflation?
Very excellent question. It's a really important area. It's one of the biggest decisions you'll make, creating the trust. But remember, you can change the formula. We don't make it easy because we don't willy-nilly, but this is in the hands of your trust. Pick the ball you think. And at the time in the 80s when we started, we had one person on the board who could run projections, on the central scales against, the market growth and housing was inflating so fast that we started out with a 10% formula. But we quickly saw it's not enough. It was not enough for people. You're asking people in the home ownership program to get a mortgage to take on the risk of that property and losing their equity. You can't, it's rental, we take all the responsibility of that part. So we thought 25%, we ran that projection and we added the capital improvement formula. So that gives people another opportunity. And we tested and it worked so well. The test you saw was, back when houses were $100,000 less, we were serving people on average at 69% median income. And today with this crazy inflation, we're serving people on average at 70% median income. So we test ourselves. Are we reaching that same affordability? If ever it skews one way or the other, we would entertain changing the formula so that it works. And then to the second part of your question, a lot of groups are going with just like a percentage a year increase. Our concern, and I have an open mind about this, but one thing when you somehow gauge at the market, people understand that. You could show them the value and say, you got in with an $80,000 grant and now this is what the market price and this is what you're leaving behind for the next buyer, But sometimes the formula is based on different things like COLA. People are challenged that seeing how that fits with housing. And so we haven't had a push one way. We haven't had a push to change it at all. And then this way, at least we know we are tracking our stock with the market, because if we have to buy something back, we have to rehab it and we need to finance it. We're operating in a real estate market. We had a co-op, Flint Avenue Co-op was pictured there, and they had a limited equity formula. And during the 90s, when people could, mortgage a house with no money down, remember those crazy products in the 90s? They were not able to get co-op members to buy into the co-op because the share was too big. So they went to zero equity. So you're right, you always need to calibrate. Are you serving the income group you want? Are you excluding anybody? Something that they're looking at in big metro markets across the country is that appraisal is very race-based, not just red line neighborhoods, but actually if an appraiser comes to if you're selling your home and they see that you're Black family, they will appraise it as high a price, which is an awful thing. So those trusts are going to a percentage formula. So appraisal won't affect disparate impact on people of color.
Okay, I before we go on to, I'm afraid, we're gonna hit the last segment and then there's not gonna be any time left.
Okay.
And I did invite Megan McDonough, who has a lot of experience in this area with existing community land trust, and also she's the director of Habitat for Humanity. So I just wanted to call on Megan if she could give a brief remarks on the experience in the Franklin County area with these models. Megan, are you here?
Thanks, Judy. I was trying to look at the list of people here to see if there's anyone from the Valley Community Land Trust. The Valley Community Land Trust is a scattered site community land trust that's been in Franklin County since the late 70s and is a small community land trust, but owns property in Coleraine, Wendell, Greenfield, and Montague. But they have more, their current membership is mostly residents of the land trust. But they do have an open membership, so people who wanted to get involved with that land trust could engage with them. I do see Linda Slakey is on this call, and she's the president of the board of the Amherst Community Land Trust. And the Amherst Community Land Trust is newer, but has a lot of great experience in very recent years in our Pioneer Valley. Amherst Community Land Trust, Linda could probably speak directly about them, but Pioneer Valley Habitat did a partnership with them where we built a duplex home on land owned by the Amherst Community Land Trust. And that was a great way to partner with the long-term stewardship and the membership base of the Amherst Community Land Trust and the building skills of the volunteers from Habitat for Humanity. And Pioneer Valley Habitat for Humanity builds in Hampshire and Franklin counties. So I think there's definitely room for more regional community land trusts. The Valley Community Land Trust doesn't operate in the housing subsidy model. They work more with individual contributions and home ownership versus the great so that's part of the scale difference between something, a small local trust versus this in the state of Vermont, where the city and the state have really invested in community land trusts as a affordable housing vehicle. Judy, do you want to, Linda, I'd love to hear Linda just spend 1 minute or 2 minutes telling us about how they've offered. They have $1 million worth of land coming from their members. So,
yeah, sure.
I can speak to that very briefly. First, I'll say that the first project we did was actually the partnership with Habitat, and that was absolutely crucial. We started with a lot of goodwill and very little experience, and we depended on Megan and her team of volunteers to get us through the process of selection and just be a friend and partner during the years that we were sorting out our organizational matters. The Amherst Community Land Trust was launched by a group of us who had in common that we'd lived in Amherst for a long time. And as we got older, we're just having a very personal awareness that what we had done would not be possible now. That is, when I speak to people about the model, I often say, if you've lived here for even more than 10 years, and certainly more than 15 or 20, ask yourself whether, so what was your income when you came into Amherst? And could a person in that employment sector now, whatever that income would be, could they do what you did? And there's a moment of silence, and then the sort of light dawns that Amherst is totally pricing itself out of a robust community across the economic spectrum. So that prompted some of our founding members to offer their own property to the trust. Now, some of those will take a while to be realized. They basically left it as legacies. They're still there. Although one member is planning to give the land to the trust while he still lives there. So he'll be a resident member and his home will be in its will. So we've actually done a fair amount, both learning and beginning to share stuff with Grounded Solutions about how to handle that kind of donated property. Because donors have particular conditions and we have to sort through both our relationship to them and how to make sure that our mission is served.
That's great.
Thank you. Right. Okay, so there's one more question that somebody wanted to squeeze in. Is there a minimum time of residency in the service area to qualify or rent or buy a home in the CHT? Is there any residency requirement?
No, we're very open with that.
Okay, so there's one last segment that it's examples of CLTs in other places in other countries. So let's quickly go to that.
You bet. Like I say, I think, well, okay, how we've adapted to other places, and I can save us some time in here. But in terms of this expansion and use applications, I wanted to just look at in the late 20th century, what was causing people to look at this model. And, you know, the wealth gap and low wages, that was an issue already in the 80s and 90s. And communities were worried about their workforce accessing the market centers. And of course, you know, all those subsidized loan products just led to inflation and housing costs. And it's tremendous inflation, gentrification, and housing costs. But after the financial crash, things have gotten much worse. There's a decline in overall in homeownership. We're back to the 1960s level. The racial wealth gap in homeownership has never been greater. And the high cost of rentals has followed the crash of most markets. So this is the dire crisis that Judy described at the beginning. Every community around the country is experiencing this. So at first in the 90s, CLTs grew, you can see across the country, primarily on the coast. And that's not a matter of politics, red and blue states. That's because coastal property was the most valuable, the first places to gentrify. And those were the markets where people got it. So you had to somehow preserve affordability. But today there's community land trusts. There's 260 of them in the country. And I'd say over half of them now are really developing, even saving rental housing and doing a wide variety of things to meet this housing crisis we all are working on. And yeah, about 260 now. And then after the crash, Grounded Solutions and which I'll talk about in a second, and the Urban Institute for Land Policy did a study of shared equity ownership across the country. And it was a study somewhat like what we had done. We were part of this one too. And to see how, again, to show the community broadly how this model works or doesn't work for people. And again, we're continuing to serve first-time home buyers. We've really increased the share of Black and Brown people who we're working with deliberately across the country in these communities. We were always the first hit with speculation and gentrification. The people are earning on average $14,000 in the time they live in a shared equity home, which is a substantial earning, and 6 out of 10 go on to buy in the market. I think one of the biggest indicators after the crash and made people sit up was that over 99% of shared equity homes avoid foreclosure. And the people who were in shared equity homes during the crash were 10 times less likely than to go into foreclosure, not 10 times less than other low-income homeowners, but 10 times less than the entire market. And another measure of security is there were studies done after the market after the crash to see how lower income home buyers fared, how long did they succeed as homeowners. And 5 years later, only 50% of homeowners in conventional products were still homeowners, but in community land trusts, with us, it was like 98% across the country, 90. So that's an indication you can't build wealth if you lose your wealth, right? If you suddenly can't afford it. So it's great to hear a note of Grounded Solutions. This is the national network that started out as a network of organizations and now is a big tent that is the national expert on all models of permanently affordable housing, and they bring together nonprofits, cities, counties, and states that are doing programs like inclusionary zoning and any form of permanent affordability. And then we do, data to be able to prove things like this study, evaluation of programs, policy and advocacy, and bring resources to communities of technical assistance and some big initiatives in major areas. Raise a lot of money for this purpose. If you Google them and go on their site, there's a lot of free resources, as I said, for startup and to help you see what other trusts can do. So moving on to our history of growth. In 2016, Champlain Housing Trust won the World Habitat Award. And as part of that, our duty was to have a site study visit. And we had people from 13 nations spend a week in Burlington studying the model. And I've circled these people, this is you. These are the people who went back to their countries and started trusts and did something about affordable housing. Just from that small group. And here they are. There's up in the upper left. Let's just get right. Cities like Brussels, London, and Toronto have strong organizations now and political support. And most importantly, some of these folks have also led the creation of active networks. Up in the left, you see East London CLT is now London CLT, helping many different boroughs in the city. Again, sort of a hub and spoke model of community land trust. Brussels has over 100 CLT homes occupied and in construction, and they helped to expand around Belgium with 34 homes underway in Ghent and startups in Leuven and Antwerp as well. Also, the leader in Brussels got funding from the European Union in 2017 to start a network across Europe for CLT growth. And they've been working very closely with startups in France. And France has a very different property law regime, it's Salic law. And the lease that governs this had to actually be enshrined in the law. That happened in 2014. And it's actually the lease that we use that's in French law. And since then, the big social housing organizations in France, who mostly have large cooperative housing portfolios, are implementing CLTs. And what folks love in the European countries that have a lot of social housing is that all of their social housing is rental, and they have never been able to offer this kind of a social, they're not worried about the issue of taking homeownership out of the market, as was a big issue in the US when we started, but more, we can add this opportunity. So there are now land trusts started up in Lille, Nantes, Paris, and Rennes. This photo here is taken in Paris in an old, this is great, it's a huge site that was an old hospital that's going to be redeveloped by the city, and they're planning on CLT homes there. So that would really be a start of a really great neighborhood. The other notable startups around Western Europe as a result of SCHIC is Berlin, Amsterdam, and Geneva. Again, in Switzerland, the co-op model is big, and they're really happy to add the home ownership of this kind to their opportunities. The CLT model took off very fast in England and was very strongly adopted. There's a national CLT network that has 300 members. And to date, though, they've only produced 935 homes, but there's 5,000 homes in the pipeline now. So they went from starting very small to this sudden burst. A lot of the trusts were really small villages just trying to protect themselves from that rural gentrification that you can imagine. So ordinary people could live there. And the network had secured a £4 million government grant to create a fund for startups and capacity building, and have been very active. This photo is London CLT's first project. Again, a redeveloped old hospital site. These big sites, white elephants in the middle of cities are great opportunities. And this is in East London's Mile End, a very low income neighborhood with lots of immigrants, and they've had their first homes there. In
Okay,
Canada,
just about reaching the end of our time.
okay,
Yeah,
so, all right, so you can
last
see
words.
what do you want me
Last
to do?
words, Brenda.
So I'll just wrap up and say you can see different applications. I'm going to mention Scotland because 50% of the land in Scotland is owned by 450 individuals. So they've been recapturing land for their communities. Now there's in Latin America, the model is taking off, and this NGO is working in Rio's favelas. So neighborhoods with strong histories and connectivity using the land trust to preserve their affordability. We are recognized in the UN United Nations Habitat Goals. And the rest is just resources. So you will have this presentation and you can access the resources to take your learning further.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Brenda.
Wow, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Right, right. So, you know, we're doing this whole housing forum as a learning thing for ourselves and for everybody, and there will definitely be follow-up. You'll be getting an email with everybody's email, everybody that wants to be on an email list and stuff, and we will be calling follow-up meetings. And we will have all of Brenda's slides as a resource. So I just really want to thank everyone for coming. I want to thank Brenda, I want to thank Megan, and thank everybody. And we will be signing off now. So thank you very much.